So here we go. So we're going to talk about throwing exceptions, and this time we're going to throw our own exception here. Let's take a look at this here. So we're going to include the IO stream. We're going to do include std except. This is like standard exceptions is what these are. So let's see here. So this is a library that's got like standard tools for throwing exceptions. Fstream, by the way, already included the std except already, which is why I didn't have to include it like separately. A lot of function libraries include things like this, but if you're building your own code from the ground up, you'll want to include this to be able to throw exceptions in code you've designed yourself. So here's what we've got. We're going to have an integer for process, or this is a function that generates an integer. We're going to process the boxes, and the input is it's going to be an integer for the number of boxes. Then we've got an if statement. If the number of boxes is less than 1, because fun fact, if you're counting boxes, you can have 1 or something higher. If they give you 0 or a negative number, that is not a valid entry for the number of boxes. So then what we're going to do is we're going to throw an exception. And then like we would do other stuff, which we're not going to bother with that. And then we're going to return 1. And so we're using, instead of return 0, which is the default for if things go well, we're going to return 1 for the as like the error code, the numerical code that something went wrong. Then what I'm going to do in the main program is I'm going to have a try block, and I'm going to process boxes for -1. I'm deliberately feeding it a negative number. And then here we've got an exception here. So we're calling it catch exception E. This is kind of the standard way if you're using standard except for throwing an exception here. And then I'm going to output the text exception, Your Honor, and then it's going to complain about that basically. So you run this exception, Your Honor. So you tried it with a negative number, and it didn't work out so well. What you'd probably do with something like this is you could maybe do something like this. You could say cout. Please enter a number of boxes, and then end the line, and then you do like int x, and then do like cin x, and then do like process boxes of x, and then this would be kind of like what it would look like for if you're asking the user to provide you an input, and then the user has to type in something, and then based on whether they, so then what we could do is like the program is done, something like that. So you can do something like this, and then this way it's going to, so like enter a number of boxes, and I could do 10, and so it's everything's hunky-dory. And then like you run it, and you're gonna do like, I don't know, -12, and it's like exception, Your Honor, and then it doesn't work. So this is probably a more like conventional way you might use this. What the homework assignment is going to entail is that like in the game of blackjack, you start with a hand of 2 cards, and then basically what's going to happen is the player has a choice to hit, which means they get another card, or the player will stand, which means they're going to keep the cards that they have. And if they're sitting on, like, say, a pair of kings, which is worth 20, and you're trying to get to 21, you might say, you know what, I'm going to stand. This is a pretty good solid number here. I'm not going to risk busting by going over. And so in the blackjack program, you all are going to use something like this, where it's basically going to ask the user, like, do you hit or stand? And you could maybe even tell them to type H or S for short. And what I want you to do is just design the code so that if they type in anything other than just H or S, like if they type in Q or 9 or whatever, throw an exception and basically say that was not a valid choice, and then like go back up to the top and prompt them to do it again. So in the blackjack program, I want you to throw an exception so that if the user types any option, any key other than H or S for hit or stand, throw an exception and basically tell them like, bruh, you typed it in wrong. So it would look something kind of along these lines. Let's see.
So,
Yes, sir.
throw the exception and you say like do stuff, like you had a comment of do stuff. What typically is done?
Well, so you might have something like I mean, just any command that you would put in your program, like you could say like the number of boxes is
So basically, if you type in less than 1, it would see out the number of boxes is, and then
so if it's less than 1, it's going to throw an exception. If it doesn't throw an exception, it's going to spit out the number of boxes.
okay.
Like that's what I just told it to do. So like this, the number of boxes is 10. And that's like, so like in the blackjack program, what you would do is like you would display the total points that the person has. Like they have a jack and a 3, so they're at 13, and you'd say your total is 13. And then you'd have a prompt and be like, do you hit or stand? And then they would like type in either H or S. And then anything that is not one of those two characters, throw an exception and basically tell them like that they need to try again.
Okay, I was thinking if you threw the exception that they have to repeat the exception. That makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and also what you'd probably want to do is be like, so you'd probably also want to do like a while loop in your homework assignment. You'd want to have like a while and be like choice is not equal to S, because you basically you could define it as a char, which is a single character. So you'd have like char C, just to call it something. So while, or actually I guess choice is what I'm calling it, char choice. So while choice is not equal to S, and then you're going to run a while loop. And then you would, so I'd have to kind of rebuild this whole thing, but you'd basically want, because when the person chooses stand, that's going to basically stop what you're doing and end the loop. Because once the player chooses stand, they're not taking any more cards. You basically want to set it up in a while loop so that if they choose stand, you basically just skip over the loop and you're done. And then you would do a try, and if they choose hit, you basically draw another card and add their total and show them the points that they have. And then if they choose anything other than hit, throw an exception and basically prompt them to do it again. And by having that in a while loop, it'll basically go back to the top. And so anytime stand is not chosen, it'll either add a card for hit or else throw an exception because they typed in. And
Can I throw an exception under the main function, or do I have to keep it in the main function?
oh, up here,
Do I have to throw it up there, or can I throw it in the actual program itself?
I would suggest having just a like a little function for like maybe a function here called like char choice. And then have a char for x, and then if x is equal to h, well, let's see, if x is not equal to h, throw an exception. Otherwise, you'd see out the total is, and then you'd output, and then you probably want a different function for like the card total, which is like another part of the project actually.
So, but like under the int main function, can I throw exceptions down there? Or no?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's possible to do that too.
Okay. Would
Yes.
that still create the type of code that we're looking like?
Well, so I mean, basically
Difference basically.
you would have it maybe like here, like somewhere up here.
Yeah.
So like you'd have a something maybe kind of like right about there. So you've got an if statement where it's going to throw exceptions, and then you'd have a while loop where it's going to try things. Actually, you probably just putting it down here would be the way to go.
Because then it'll throw an exception anytime the while loop isn't run successfully.
Yes.
Okay.
So something kind of along those lines.
Okay. I was just wondering if it had to be.
Yeah, I mean, there's the different ways you could approach it, but I mean, you could put it in like the main program. Let's see. Let's look at this other example, shall we? So here we've got a vector, we've got standard exceptions. This is actually kind of like what you were describing, Reed. So like here, here I actually don't have any separate functions. I've got in my main program. This time I've actually got a for loop. For the blackjack, I would actually probably use a while loop. So this is probably a better template to go off of maybe. But like what you would have is like we've got this vector here. It's got 5 entries. We've got a for loop to cycle through 7 entries. We're going to try this. We're going to output this. We've got a catch. If we run into a range error, which we will, because it's going to look at the 6th and 7th entry, which are not there because there's only 5 of them. So then what it's going to do is it's going to throw an exception for that. And then like you could have another kind of logic error here. You can't have multiple catch clauses. This is for a runtime error. This is for a logic error. Let's see, I'm missing line 22. Am I one bracket short. Is that what the problem is? Okay. So like here, what we've got on day 0, 7.5 hours were worked. On day 1, 8.5 hours were worked. It's going through. And then by the time it gets to the last entry, when it tries reading in further, it's going to throw an exception there because it's impossible to read vector entries that aren't there. So then it throws an exception. And it's got this catch statement where it's saying that it basically ran into some sort of problem. And so this might be a template for, like I was saying, how to do the thing in the blackjack. Like I said, I would do it as a while instead of a for. And basically you're just going to ask the user to type in a char. You're going to say, type in H for hit. And if it does, give them another card. Type in S for stand, and then when they type in S, that's basically going to cue the end of the program, the end of the while loop. Otherwise, throw an error because they didn't type in one of the valid options. Here's a slightly different version of the program. Here, the try function is going to produce additional information about the error in a string that can be used with the what command, and that's going to tell the user what went wrong. So this would be like if you're designing it to try to give the users feedback on what happened. So we've got except.what for when it has the catch clause right here. And again, I'm missing one of the brackets. So what vector range M range check? So it was aborted. So here this is kind of cryptic, but this is basically telling you that the problem is the range of the vector, which essentially means that it tried to the range, which is 5, and there is no value basically. So the what now? That's what's outputting this. The what function is a function from std except, and what it except.what displays a message to the user telling them what went wrong.
Oh, okay. So
Last time, all it did was it just failed and it didn't tell me anything. I knew what the mistake was, but the program didn't tell me that.
So can I use that when I'm trying to build logic to accept that one function?
You're certainly welcome to try that. At a bare minimum, all I'm going for is just a simple try catch where if they type in anything other than H or S, you abort and go back to the beginning, basically. I'm basically showing you this because this is a thing for what we're attempting to do. With what I'm asking you to do, you do not necessarily have to use this, but I am showing it to you.
This is just like built-in function.
Yeah, that's what standard except has, because there's standard exceptions of things that programmers are probably accustomed to going wrong, like some sort of issue with the request for a vector entry not matching how many elements are actually in the vector in the first place.
Okay.
And with all these things, these are like things that you sort of can realistically predict somebody somewhere is going to mess up. And again, like, people make typos all the time with our blackjack program. It's totally believable that like somebody types in something other than one of two options. And so we're trying to get ahead of that problem and saving users of our game from themselves and just accounting for the fact that they might accidentally type something in that is not an H or an S.